There was once two kids who were educated in two completely different ways, and the result were two different perceptions of reality. The girl was taught that truth comes from reputable sources, and that a story could be confirmed as true if it's reported by multiple reputable sources, and that the most reliable sources are authoritative. She grew up and became Karen, easily frightened by reports on the news. The boy, on the other hand, was taught to look past reputation and get back to primary documents, that the more primary sources you find, the better, and that truth was something that had to be discerned. That arguments had to be scanned for logical fallacies, that by identifying these fallacies you could identify manipulations. And he grew up filling out discernment charts, so he could learn to filter what he knows from what hasn't been proven to him. And he would grow up to question the things other people blindly believe. The girl's education focused on what to think, but the boy's was about how to think, how to filter and properly categorize information in his brain. And that's what I help parents teach their kids with the fake newspaper that I write, the primary sources I create, and the different charts we fill out. The how of thinking. Check out my private homeschool community and my books on how information is controlled, fake news, morality, and so much more. In March of 2020, the world changed forever. But the most interesting part of that experience, and it was an experience, was what it revealed about ourselves and what it revealed about our neighbors and the people around us. Because there was no hiding. When you walked out in public, you can visualize your neighbor's worldview and their perspective. So in spite of all of the lies being told to us by media, in spite of all of the lies being told to us by the government and institutions that we were supposed to trust, the world was actually more transparent than it had ever been. Because I can see the truth right in your face as long as I can see your face. Because when you walked out in public, if you were in New York, for example, like I was, you found yourself surrounded by people who were in almost a hypnotized state of fear. And because of that, they lashed out at you. They lashed out at me. I can't tell you how many times I went into stores in New York and I was told to leave, or I had people yell at me, in which I almost got in physical altercations because people were approaching me aggressively in public in front of my children. And that wasn't unique to me. That was the experience of so many people around the country, because the media and the government and the institutions had flipped a switch of mind control and worked our neighbors into a frenzy. People always ask, how is it possible that neighbors would be willing to load the people that live next to them onto a train and send them away to a camp? Well, we witnessed that firsthand. We witnessed the power of propaganda. But what we really witnessed is a schism in the way that people think, which I tried to touch upon in my 1 minute, 30-second introduction that I posted to Reel, to TikTok, and to here at the beginning of this video. But it really got me thinking about where I came from and the way I was educated, my background as a history teacher, right? And the way that school children are taught sourcing. Because when you're a kid and you're given a paper, you're given an assignment in school, you're given a criterion for determining if information is valid or if it's not. And the criterion they give you, and I'll give you the quick rundown. I did a whole video on this yesterday if you want to go back and watch that. But the criterion they give school children is you are looking for reputable sources, so like the New York Times. You want to cross-reference those reputable sources. So if the New York Times makes a claim and the Washington Post makes a claim and the Washington Examiner makes that same claim, well, then now you have 3 reputable sources that made the claim. You have cross-referenced that. You could cite that in your paper, and now you know that that claim is true. And of course, the ultimate thing that they want you to look for and to cite in your papers is authoritative sources. So if the CDC, for example, says something, then from that worldview, that's as good as gold. This is the framework that they teach school children. This is how they teach them to think. And you can see why when all of the authoritative bodies, right? If that's your worldview, if that's what you've been given by the system, which is what's being given to our children in public school right now. So we all as parents have to think and make a decision. Is this what I want for my child? Is this what I want them to be taught? The how of thinking, right? If that's your framework and you wake up one morning and the president of the United States says that we need to shut down the country for the next 15 days, and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times and the Boston Globe and every newspaper says that there is something that has come from across the world and the air is now a threat to you. And if you go outside, you and grandma and everyone you love, it might be your last days here on Earth. And then you have the CDC and the WHO and all these authoritative institutions. Now remember, your whole life you've been taught you're looking for reputable and you're looking for authoritative. Well, if that's your framework, can you really blame your neighbor for getting worked up into the frenzy? I know we could blame them, but humor me here. Can you really blame your neighbor for getting worked up into the frenzy that they were worked up into? And by the way, if they haven't changed their framework, their how of thinking, if they haven't evaluated that brain of theirs, they'll do it again. In fact, I would argue that it's happened time and time again with the wars in foreign countries, but we'll talk about that in another talk. But it got me thinking to my journey and where I came from. And I think my blessing growing up was I didn't take school that seriously. And it's funny because so many people you come across who are free thinkers now, who are some of the most impressive people you ever have the privilege of listening to, people that I really respect, they kind of say that same thing where they always got in trouble in school. They didn't take it that seriously. I remember when I was in elementary school, they had me they called me into a meeting at the principal's office. They had the school psychologist there, my mother, and they told her that I had ADD, ADHD. They wanted to put me on pharmaceuticals. And my mother said to them, "Do you have the bottle with you?" And they said, "No, Mrs. Pike, why?" And she said, "Because if you did, I was going to shove it right up your..." Thank you, Mom. Because I wouldn't be the same person if they were able to get away with doing that to me. And anyway, I got B's, I coasted by, went to college, but the one thing I was always interested in was history. And the school system actually, if you're really into history, does teach you a little bit about primary sources. Enough to the point where I knew I knew how to get back to primary sources. But it was still always about authority. I remember when I was a junior in college, I realized, oh my God, I'm about to be into the real world. I'm about to be in the real world. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to have young people looking up to me, that I'm going to be responsible for molding their minds. I need to have a clue about this world. So I said, okay, from this point forward, I'm going to take school seriously. And my academic performance completely changed from that point forward. I would go to my master's program, and I graduated with a 4.0 GPA, and I got the award for the best student in my program, number one student in my program. But here I was a junior in college. I was sitting around my apartment with my friends, drinking and being a fool. Like, that's what college is about, right? You drink, you chase girls, you be a fool. And there I was, and I made that decision. I said, all right, I'm going to find out. I'm going to figure out this world right now. So what did I do? I was told my whole schooling that you need to look to reputable sources. So I said, okay, I'm going to turn on Fox News. I was leaning right at the time. But I'm also going to spend an equal amount of time watching CNN. And I'm going to get both perspectives, the left and the right, from the reputable sources, and I will understand the world. See, I had an open mind then, even though I was within the framework of what they wanted me to be. So I'm figuring out the world, and for the next few years, I was all about that. I was watching Fox and CNN. I was stuck in that very little matrix that they keep you in, and that very little Overton window where you think you're getting the full perspective, and you're in a forest staring at one little tree. And this, I love this because this is a talk on the how of thinking, and understanding this allows us to raise our children so that they don't have to go through this awakening experience that I went through. So I was doing all that, and like I said, I did very well in my master's program, and then around 2015, I started to wake up to the world. My sister had told me the food system was corrupt, and I was like, okay, crazy. Well, I did know how to get back to primary documents. So I started to look into the food system, and I said, wow, you know what? My sister, she's pretty accurate. And then she told me that there was this guy, Bill Fence, you know who I'm talking about? I'm just trying to talk around the AI here. But there was this guy who loved depopulating, and he gave this TED Talk, and she showed me this TED Talk, and I was like, oh, okay. So I started looking into that, and that blew my mind. What I found. That these people were getting awards for reducing the amount of humans in this world. That was pretty jarring. So I said, okay, I'm going to start finding the people that talk about this stuff. And of course, I came across Alex Jones, right? Everyone goes down their progression of rabbit holes, right? But I came across this guy, Richard Grove, and his podcast, The Peace Revolution. And Richard Grove, if you're not familiar with him, the guy's forgotten more than I've ever known. The guy's incredible. So Richard, if you're out there, if you're listening to this, I'd love to talk to you. You've been a big inspiration in my life. But I came across Richard Grove and his website, tragedyandhope.com, The Peace Revolution, and I really started deep diving. And Richard was different because, one, I related to him. He was a forensic historian. My background was a historian. I actually, when I first came across him, a friend had referred him to me, and I told my friend that this guy Grove was an idiot. I was going to prove him wrong. And then I started looking into Grove's claims and getting back to primary documents, and I was like, oh man, I'm the idiot. Richard Grove is very intelligent. And Grove started talking about classical education and something called intellectual self-defense, a term that I've since hijacked, but I always credit Richard. I don't say it every time, but if you follow me long enough, I credit Richard Grove with the term intellectual self-defense, which I think I've taken to another level, and I think he would appreciate if he saw my work. So he talked about intellectual self-defense and basically rewiring your brain so that you make sure that you don't get fooled in the future, right? Because if you were so-called asleep and you had this awakening because you came across new information, it's not really an awakening until you retrain yourself to interpret information, to filter information through your brain. The antiviral software of the computer that is your brain. So I started to learn about classical education, and my journey went on for years after that, and I've really formulated my own systems of my version of intellectual self-defense. But I had to retrain myself to think. So many people go through an awakening and they think they're awake because they realized that the Democrats are lying and the Republicans are lying, and now they found another truther that they could cling to, or a letter of the alphabet that's giving them the gravy, right? This letter that you're not allowed to say. It's giving them all the information, and now they're a knower. So if you come along and tell them that that's a psyop and why that's wrong, they lash out at you the same way a Democrat lashes out at a Republican. They're not really awake. They haven't retrained themselves how to think. That's what it's all about. It's about retraining yourself in the how of thinking. And when we educate our children, it's about training them in the how of thinking. And this is the most important stuff. People love the gravy, right? But if we were building a better society, this is where you do it. If you want to wake people up and win the future, this is where you do it. So you have to train yourself how to filter information. So I started looking into many things, but anyway, years go by, and now through my education, coming through the education system, being trained, I got a bachelor's degree in history education, a master's degree in special education, and then I went through my own human awakening. And I've spent years focusing on the how of thinking, not the what of thinking, right? Take pride in realizing you are wrong about something, admitting you are wrong, and then readjusting your worldview, because that means you're growing. That means you got stronger. It's like you got on a bench press and did 30 reps. Why would you be upset that you found out you were wrong? You should be happy about that. So I came up with this system, and this is what I presented in the first minute and 30 seconds of this video that we should be teaching our children. And that is, they should be learning how to get back to primary sources, how to source information, right? They should be learning how to cross-reference primary sources and get back to multiple primary sources. They should be learning the logical fallacies and how to identify a logical fallacy in an argument. I was on Instagram today, and I talked about how in 2016, long story short, there were 17 intelligence agencies that claimed the country that had the Bolshevik Revolution happen was responsible for hacking the DNC emails that were sent to WikiLeaks. And I pointed out that it later came out that none of those intelligence agencies ever accessed the DNC's servers. The Democratic National Committee didn't allow them to access the servers. So I said that that claim is invalid. So the guy comes along and he says, "You've done nothing to disprove the claim." And I said, "You don't understand the logical fallacies. You don't understand thinking. You don't know your how." Because in a classical education, if you've learned the logical fallacies, you know that the burden of proof is always on the person or the institution making the claim. So whether it's those 17 agencies or the CDC or the WHO, you can say what you want to say, but unless you show me proof, I don't care what you said. And you don't get to determine what truth is. Truth is something that has to be discerned. It's something that you have to prove to me. And you don't just get to say that, "Well, Brett, you're dumb. I don't have to prove truth to you." "Well, Brett, I'm better educated in this. I don't have to prove that to you." Yes, you do. You do have to prove that. And when we raise our children and educate our children, we want to teach them the how of thinking. So we teach them to get back to primary sources. We teach them about the logical fallacies, and we teach them that if someone is making a claim, it has to be proven to them. And the last thing we do, so we teach them sourcing, we teach them logical fallacies, and then we want them to be able to visualize the process of thinking. So we do that through a very simple chart. It's a 3-tier chart. I call it a discernment chart. I know and how I know. I think I know and why I think I know. And I heard and where I could look into what I heard. It's just 3 tiers. And when they read news articles, when they watch the news, or when they read a book, or any topic that you want to do research into. Doesn't matter whether they're looking into the theory of evolution versus creationism. Doesn't matter what the topic is. Globe Earth versus flat Earth. Doesn't matter what the topic is. When they're looking into information or doing research on any topic or animals, they could take out that chart and break it down into tiers. I know and how I know. I think I know and why I think I know. Or why I know. I think I know and why I think that. I heard and where I can look. And by doing that and writing down how they categorize the information, they're actually visualizing how they filter information through their brain. They're visualizing the how of thinking. And that's what we want to do when we educate our children. We live in this culture of standardized testing, the what of thinking. We want you to regurgitate the what of reputable sources, the what of authoritative sources. That's wrong. Teach your children the how of thinking. We want you to filter, to categorize the how of thinking, the logical fallacies, the sourcing, if the source is valid and if it's been proven to you, or if you think more proof is needed before you accept something as reality. This is the schism. This is what we have seen since March of 2020 when they did 15 days to slow the spread, and you went outside and you could see on your neighbor's face, if you could see your neighbor's face, their worldview. And my God, was it good when you would run into another person who didn't have their face covered. Because where I was, there was not a lot of that. So when I saw someone that had the free thought and the courage to do so, I'd go up to them and I'd let them know that they are pretty awesome. We can teach our children the how of thinking. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Maybe I'll make a video on it, plus it helps my algorithm. Please hit the like button, hit the share button. I've grown my social media accounts. I've grown my TikTok. I have hundreds of thousands of followers. Instagram, hundreds of thousands. But I don't have that yet on YouTube, and it would be very helpful to getting my message out and very helpful to what I'm trying to do. And if you're interested in what I do with Classical Learner, go to classicallearner.com and a membership to Homeschools Connected. You get access to all of the lesson plans, the unit studies, the courses that I make, the courses that I teach, and it is, as of November 2023, I'm assuming this video will crush forever, but as of November 2023, it is currently $15 a month for teaching your child the how of thinking and so much more. All right, guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.